Well, Sully's on the couch, ready to go. I assume you are ready to go. And I'm Ms. Collier. And on today's episode of the Tortilla Cat Files, I'm going to talk to you about John Chapman, AKA, which means also known as Johnny Appleseed. Now, this topic came up because I have to confess, when I retired from teaching fifth grade, I got started playing this very strange little video game where you're building a town and you have to build a farm so you can feed the people in the town. And my mom started playing the same game. We share a house, for those of you that don't know. And I got to the point where I could plant apple trees on my farm. And I was saying, yeah, I get to plant apple trees because I'm ahead of her in the game. Haha, I get to plant apple trees and you don't. Which led to the discussion of, are apples actually native to North America? This is the kind of stuff we sit around and talk about. Which led to a lot of Googling, which led to some very interesting facts that came up. And I realized that I can tie all of that I learned, because why should I bother wasting what I learned, in with a talk about Johnny Appleseed, who fits into the time period that you're looking at right now, and is kind of an interesting story. He's a figure that people think they know a lot about, because we know the legend of him, because there's the legend and there's the real man, like with so many things. Good morning, Scout. Come over here. Don't knock over my coffee. That would be bad. Come over here. There you go. So first, let's start off talking about apples. The apples that we're used to, the ones that we get at the grocery store, that are the big apples, well, not that big, but the big apples that we eat, just slice up and eat, or put into pies, or, just what we're used to seeing at the grocery store, the red delicious, golden delicious, do not get in that box. The gala apples, those are not native to North America. What's native to North America are called crab apples. They're about 2 inches wide, or big, and they are very sour. I mean, when you bite these things, your face would go, not good apples to eat. You might be able to make them into cider if you used, which is a drink. If you put enough sugar, you might be able to make them into a pie if you put enough sugar with them. But they're little, and they're not tasty. That's what grows wild in North America. The apples that we're used to seeing, the big, nice, sweet eating apples, originated in Xinjiang in China and in the Tian Shan Mountains of Kazakhstan. Now, scientists know this because apparently they did DNA testing and tracked the DNA back to those two regions, and have decided that that's where apples originated, which is interesting. Apples are extremely heterozygous, which means that the seed, the baby plant that grows from the seed, may not resemble the parent plant at all. And what happens with that is that as apples are disseminated, as the seeds are spread, the seed takes on the characteristics that will make it grow best in the soil where it is. So you're not going to get the same apple necessarily. If you buy this beautiful red delicious apple from the store and you eat it and you go home and you dig the seeds out of the core and you plant them, you're probably not going to get the same apple that you just ate, which is good for the apple species because it will spread widely and adapt to where it is. But it's bad because you ate that apple and you really liked it and you want more just like it. That's bad. So, pardon me. So most of the apples, in fact, all of the apples that we buy at the grocery store or that we're used to seeing, are the results of grafting apple trees. How they do that is they grow a new tree, they graft or attach part of an older tree to the new tree so that that's what grows, and that's what you're going to get. You've got a tree that's producing apples that you like. You're going to graft part of that onto a new tree so that that's what grows, and that's the kind of apples you're going to get. Now, apples got to the rest of the world from China and from Kazakhstan by traveling along a trade route known as the Silk Road, which actually began happening between 130 BC and 1453 AD. That's when things were traveling by caravans of traders from the east over to the west. Remember, that's part of what kicks off the whole age of exploration, is that people are tired of having to wait on traders or have to walk all that way, and there weren't any cars or anything. And so that's why they started looking for a water route. That's because of the Silk Road. So eventually apples make it all the way to Europe. And then eventually the European settlers, when they come to North America, when they're going to settle, they bring apple tree seedlings with them and plant them in North America. And that's how apples make it to North America. Pardon me. So that leads us to, and today there are over 7,500 apple species. I knew there were lots, but I had no idea there were that many. That leads us to John Chapman. He was born September 26th of 1774, so just before the Declaration of Independence was written, in that turmoil that was the beginnings of the American Revolution. That's when Jonathan Chapman was born. He was born in Leominster, Massachusetts. His father's name was Nathaniel Chapman, and he fought in the Revolutionary War and actually served under George Washington. His mother, Elizabeth, died in 1776. And so he grew up for a little while without his mother. And his father, when the war was over, remarried a lady named Lucy Cooley, and they had 10 more kids. So he had lots of little half brothers and sisters. His father apprenticed him to what was called a nurseryman, somebody that planted fruit trees and tended them, and knew how to graft the apples and knew how to do all of the different species. Apprenticeship was sort of like sending a kid to trade school, so that when they grew up, they would have a business, that they would have the skills to start a business. It was a very common practice. If you were wealthy, you might go to college and you might become a doctor or a lawyer. Just doctors was nothing compared to what it is now. But if you were a middle-class kid and didn't have a lot of money, sometime when you were about 13, 14, 15 maybe, you would be apprenticed out to someone who had a business, and they would teach you how to do these things. And it was sort of like trade school. We know that John Chapman planted his first apple tree nurseries, and a nursery doesn't mean a place, in this case, a place where there are babies. It means a place where there are young trees that you have to take care of. In Allegheny Valley in Pennsylvania in about 1789. And then he began traveling west through Ohio and on into Indiana. And he would walk along, and as he walked along, he would plant apple tree orchards. He was always ahead of the colonists. He was kind of on the front wave of colonists moving west. And he was very good at picking areas where the colonists were going to want to settle. Maybe he looked at the way the terrain of the land, how the land was flat and there was good water sources. Maybe he was just really good at choosing land that was arable, good fertile land that could be planted. I don't know exactly how he did this, but he would plant a little nursery of apple trees, and then he would keep moving. And when he got as far west as he wanted to go at that point, then he would turn and start back. And by now, a couple of years had passed between him and those farthest sets of trees. And so he would stop, and as people were moving into the area, he would sell these plots of land that had these apple trees on them and make money. One of the things that the government did was they would offer land to homesteaders, people who were going to farm the land and create towns. And you could basically get the land for either really cheap or almost free. But to do that, you had to prove the land, which means that you had to prove that you were settled on the land. You had to prove that you had been cultivating the land, planting crops. And sometimes they even demanded that you plant fruit trees. And so John Chapman was already planting fruit trees. And if you got a piece of land that he had planted and bought that, now you were further along the way of being able to prove to the government that you were doing what you were supposed to be doing with this land. And it made it easier for you to claim the land in the long run. Now, the technology for grafting apples existed at this time, but for reasons that I don't quite know why they were, John Chapman did not believe in grafting apples. And so what he was carrying with him was a big bag of seeds from the Pennsylvania cider mills. Now, cider is a drink that they make out of apples. They squeeze them and take the juice out of them, and then they throw away the core that's left over. And so that's what he was getting and taking the seeds out of. Cider at this time was mostly hard cider, which means it was alcoholic. People were not doing a good job of keeping their water clean for drinking water, so they were dumping pollution and sometimes the remains from their toilets into the rivers and the streams so that it would get carried away, but sometimes it didn't. And then you would end up drinking all of this stuff that now makes people very ill. Or maybe you're downriver from somebody else and they're dumping their stuff into the river, and so that's what you're drinking. And so most people did not drink a lot of water because the water was considered to be unsanitary. It was not healthy to drink the water. So most people drank beer or cider, and the cider was hard cider generally. And the alcohol content actually made it more sanitary than drinking the water. So the apples that John Chapman was planting were the little small apples that were not good for eating, but they were really good for spreading, for making cider. So he was actually spreading alcohol through the Northern America, which is a different picture than what we generally have of him. He was a missionary also. He was a member of the New Church of Jerusalem, which was founded by the Swedish preacher Emanuel Swedenborg. Swedenborg had some kind of interesting ideas for his time period. He believed that animals should be treated kindly and not killed, and he believed that people should be vegetarians. Now, this is not that unusual a viewpoint for us to have in our time, but this was extremely unusual in the 1700s or 1800s. So as John Chapman was walking along planting his apple seeds, he was also passing out papers and tracts about the viewpoints, the beliefs of the New Church of Jerusalem, and trying to get people to join his church. He wore a sack instead of a shirt with holes cut in it for his head and his arms. And he generally did not wear shoes, or if he wore shoes, they were very worn out, and he walked barefoot around. Sometimes he would wear a tin hat, and then he carried this big sack of apple seeds. He didn't take a lot of stuff with him. And he was sort of an interesting little dude. We know that he died sometime in 1845. Most people used to believe that he died in the summer of 1845, and we know he died somewhere either in or around Fort Wayne, Indiana. Modern sources believe that he probably died about March the 18th of 1845. We know that he planted apple trees as far west as Indiana. Later, people believe that he got as far west as California, but that's just not true. There's no evidence of that. That's just legend. And when he died, he had the claim to 1,200 acres of orchard land that he had planted. So he died a fairly wealthy man, although what he did with all that money, it's not clear. I don't know if he left that to his half brothers and half sisters or if he left it to his church. I do know he did not marry and he did not have any children of his own. The legend about him began for sure in about 1871. He was a well-known figure. He was referred to as Johnny Appleseed within his own lifetime, although it was after he was kind of an older man. But in 1871, there was an article about him in the Harper's New Monthly magazine, which idealized his life and activities. They kind of took it and shined him up and made him all pretty and shiny and a good story for kids to read. This made his relationship with Native Americans one of respect and friendship. But Chapman himself wrote that he had a relationship with the Native Americans that was based more on suspicion and mistrust, and he had several narrow escapes with various tribes. The legend also began that the trees that he planted were at random. He'd just throw an apple here and he'd throw an apple there, and the tree would grow and it would be fine. And there was no commercial interest in planting his trees. This was just to benefit society. And we know that's not necessarily exactly true either. We know that these were planted with, Scout decided to run across the table there. We know that these trees were planted with a definite plan where the people were going to settle, and we know that he did make money off of these. The legend was cemented when a short film was made by Disney called The Legend of Johnny Appleseed. That was made in 1948. And it gave a very idealized picture of Johnny Appleseed and made him into a mainstream Christian missionary who wandered through the woods singing about how God was good to him, and was followed by a little band of forest animals, sort of like Snow White, that were his buddies and helped him plant trees and stuff. It's a cute little movie if you're interested in seeing it. It is part of a larger movie now called Melody Time, which is available on Disney Plus if you have Disney Plus. In that same movie, you get the story of Hans Brinker and Silver Skates. You get the story of Pecos Bill. And you get to my opinion, truly unfortunate setting of a poem to some really bad music about trees. Scout, get somewhere and be still. So if you have Disney Plus and you're interested in that, make sure it's okay with your parents and watch that. It's called Melody Time. But Disney did what they always do with everything, and they took him and shined him up and made him all pretty and happy, and he had a happy ending. Disney always gives you a happy ending, unless you're Old Yeller. But it doesn't always jive with the truth. If you've ever read the actual Little Mermaid story, you know that's the truth. But Johnny Appleseed, John Chapman, did do a lot for society. He did spread apples throughout society. He helped settle the new country, the new frontier. So, even if he's not exactly the legend, walking around with his tin pot hat on his head, he's still a very interesting guy. That's all I have for you today. Please let me know what you think. If there's something that you want me to talk about. Other than that, Sully, I guess we're done. We'll see you next time.